I want to say a little about why I am neither an atheist nor a theist, and for that matter, not an agnostic either. Now, this may seem a bit of a conundrum for some people, and I know there are terms like deist and stuff like that that, someone could try to apply. Chances are none of those are going to quite fit me either. And I'll say why. To the best of my ability, I'll attempt to explain it on this video. The thing is, in order to be a theist, or consider yourself a theist, generally speaking, now words get reused, so I'm going by common definitions here, but generally speaking, you have to believe in something that you would call a god. In order to be an atheist, you have to be without a belief in something that you would call a god. Well, I recognize quite well that words do get reused, and there are many definitions. And just as in one context, I would call something by one name. In another context, I would call it by another name. For example, if the person I'm speaking to speaks a different language or a different dialect of the same language, or I understand that they would perceive a word in a different way than another person I may speak to. In that same way, I may call something God in one context and call it not God in another context, depending on the linguistic context, the social context, the context of who I'm speaking to, or who my writing audience is, or whatever the case might be. Language is like that. So, I would like to present the idea of a God that an atheist could believe in. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because I know that there are a lot of theists out there that have this idea that atheists are going to get punished for their atheism, and some of them like the idea, some of them dislike it, and they would very much like to be able to prevent that from happening, but they don't see any way other than convincing the atheist to believe in their God and call it God. Now, most theists that I've come across will agree that God can live in us. They see that as a recognizable reality. However, they generally include a stipulation that God can live in us only if the particular person in which God is expected to live has accepted a particular story of what God is, or things God has done, and in a lot of cases asked that particular God into their heart, or some other such thing, that they've done certain things in order to make it possible for God to live in them. Well, I present my thought that anything I would consider a God wouldn't have such a limitation. So then the question is, who calls it a God? And which things would a particular person call God? There may be some people that just recognize the God and the word God as being too diverse to really have any substantial meaning, and just would say they wouldn't call anything God. They'll pick other words for things because other words are more descriptive, and it doesn't make much sense to use a word that really doesn't describe anything specifically. I understand that. And I'm very often the same way. However, some people will have trouble understanding some of what we're trying to say if we don't use a word that they can relate to what we're trying to talk about. And sometimes God is the only word that they can understand in the context, or some other language equivalent of God. Sometimes the vague word is the only word they know that can fit what we're trying to talk about. Such a problem, of course, is not a belief problem at all. It's not a difference in what people believe about the world around them. It's a language problem. It's a difference in how people believe words represent the world around them. For example, if a person has the idea that the word he can only refer to something masculine, the word she can only refer to something feminine, that the word who only has one meaning, then they haven't learned any substantial amount of other languages, because otherwise they would realize that words get reused. They get reused across the same language in different dialects, across the same dialect by different people, and definitely reused across different languages. So, how do we get around this problem? Now, first off, I want to clarify, I'm not saying that people do not have different beliefs about the world around them. But one of the problems that cause some of the difference in beliefs is this problem with being able to understand what words are and how they work. People get convinced that a particular word can only mean a particular thing, and they hear the word used in all kinds of different contexts, and their brain struggles to try to put all of those usages and all those meanings into one container. Now, most people will grow out of this eventually if they're exposed to enough of the world to make sense of it. But unfortunately, most people live very secluded lives. Well, maybe not unfortunate for them. A secluded life is probably a heck of a lot easier. Now, by secluded, I don't mean they don't have other people around. What I mean is that their lives are not very adventuresome. Their lives are not exciting. Their lives don't have a lot of variety in them. This is the very definition of having a normal life, is that it's not extraordinary, it's ordinary, it's normal. So, if we want to be able to discuss things like whether or not a God exists, we first have to decide what it is we're talking about. Now, if I ask someone, does Elohim exist? Well, Elohim is one of the words translated to God in the Bible. It's a Hebrew word. It can probably be most accurately translated as the good forces. Now, ask somebody who speaks Hebrew fluently, they may give you a different answer, but then there's a question of, are they translating from ancient Hebrew, or are they translating from modern Hebrew? And are they translating from one person's idea of what that Hebrew word means, or another person's idea of what that Hebrew word means? So, there is no way to completely resolve these things. But that doesn't mean that we can't work out the language differences. I've actually spent a lifetime working on providing the world with a language to help make such things possible. Well, that's not the subject of this video, so I'll just leave that go for now. But I do believe that if we try a little understanding, if we try cutting each other a little slack and recognizing that we may not be talking about the same thing when we use the same words, and actually make an effort to bridge the linguistic gap and really understand each other, I think understanding can happen. And I think that we'll find that there are a lot less differences in the core beliefs of atheists and theists than most people seem to think. And a lot less difference in the core beliefs, for that matter, of most theists than people seem to think. Because is it really important which story someone believes? Or is the story there to teach the person? If we take these stories as lessons in life, maybe we'll get a lot farther. If we recognize that there were linguistic limitations when these stories were written as well, then it's pretty obvious that taking them literally is not only not the best way, but completely impossible. Because we have no idea how they were meant literally at the time, or even if they were meant literally at the time. There's no way to know. So let's work on what we can know, what we can do. I hope some of this makes some sense to someone, and that we can get some discussion going on out there, because that's what will solve this. Human brains working together. And we need that diversity of people who do see the world in different ways to be able to learn to communicate with each other on an intelligible level and not fight about what's real and what isn't real, but simply accept the fact that they see things differently and be able to point out to each other why they think each other's wrong without it resulting in any animosity. It's okay to have different points of view. It's actually good to have different points of view.